Today we're going to make a coffee ice cream unlike any coffee ice cream you've had before. Probably, I mean, I don't know your life, but here's the idea behind what we're doing. Most coffee ice creams are kind of dairy based. They're kind of cappuccino ice creams and they're delicious. They're delicious. But what if you made something that was a coffee ice cream and not like a dairy coffee ice cream? Traditionally, that doesn't really work very well. You might have had like an espresso granita at some point in your life that was punishing on just about every level. If you like that, that's not a judgment. They're just very bitter. They're kind of grainy. The reason I thought this was a good idea to try is that my friend Chris made a video about this thing. It's called the Ninja Creami, which is a terrible name. And it's a sort of ice cream machine, sort of. I got weird about ice cream at one point in my life. And restaurants have a thing called a Pacojet. Now, a Pacojet is basically a drill press with a spinning blade attached that you sort of push through a frozen tub of ice cream base. So you freeze it solid as a block, and then the Pacojet basically slices it down to be ice cream again, which is weird, but really cool. But they're like $6,000. This is a domestic version of a Pacojet, basically, and it's £180, which is still expensive, but a lot cheaper than £6,000. And actually cheaper than some fancy ice cream machines. And it works the same way, right? You put a solid block of kind of frozen ice cream base in it. It's got a little blade in here, like this, that just gets pressed through that solid block. It's amazing. It's very cool. This is not a sponsored video. I bought this. This is not like an endorsement thing. Ninja have no idea I'm making this video. I just thought it was cool and it let me do some experiments. Now, the first experiment was, what if you just take some really nice brewed coffee, sweeten it, freeze it, and then turn that into ice cream, which is what I did. Let me get that now. This is most definitely not ice cream or sorbet at this point. It's just a solid block. For this, I brewed a little Kenyan coffee. Shout out Tim Wendelbo, very delicious. All right, it's in, it's loaded. Log it in like that. And then it's gonna take like a minute to just basically press that blade through the whole tub. Let's do sorbet. Let's have a look. So that looks like ice cream. That is brewed coffee and sugar, and that's it. It's very exciting from a texture perspective. Now I'll say, or at this point, for this recipe that I'll show you in a minute, you don't need one of these. You can use any ice cream machine that you might have. This was just interesting from a kind of texture point of view, and plus I've wanted a Pacojet for like a decade. All right, let's have a little taste. So creamy. Weird. Here's the problem. Firstly, and this is kind of weird, it tastes of coffee, but this was a vibrant, interesting, well-brewed Kenyan coffee, like tons of character. It gets really, really muted by the whole thing. It has a kind of generic coffeeness that comes through, but all of the character just doesn't. It's too cold, which kind of bummed me out. Secondly, even though this is a light roast and it's brewed well, it has this bitterness in the finish. And so, you know, one of the reasons I went with filter coffee, like a V60, is that it's kind of a lower bitterness than, say, espresso that you might dilute down, but it still has this kind of harshness in the finish that kind of takes away the joy that you want to experience with good coffee. So, to counteract all of this, I decided to set out to create a kind of different sort of coffee ice cream recipe. What I'll do now is show you what I did, what each ingredient is kind of doing, and how you might want to adapt it around the coffee that you want to turn into delicious ice cream. Credit where credit is due. This recipe was adapted from one from Chef Steps for a roasted cocoa gelato that was kind of interesting dairy-free ice cream. That was a kind of inspiring sort of starting point for me, and then I've adapted it from there. So first up, we're going to make some dry ingredients. 120 grams of sugar. I tried using brown sugar. It kind of competes with the flavor of coffee, so just stick with plain white sugar if you can. Second up, 5.5 grams of salt. That's going to do quite a lot of the work to counteract the bitterness at the back end of the coffee. It's not going to taste salty, it's just going to be delicious. Then we're going to add a couple of gums. These are the ones in the Chef Steps recipe that sort of really helped. First up is a gram of Lambda Carrageenan, and then another gram of locust bean gum. Now, gums are really interesting. They do some useful things. They help sort of produce a creamier texture, and they also slow the melt of the ice cream, which is, on a hot day, a good thing. You're going to whisk these together so they're combined, just so that they're sort of easily distributed into the water. Now, you're going to put this into about 100 mils of water because we need to heat this up to a boiling point to dissolve the sugar and hydrate the gums and get them doing the gummy thing that they need to do. So we're going to mix, combine, bring to the boil, and just gently simmer for 3 minutes, and then we're done. We're going to brew about half a litre of filter coffee here. You don't need all of it, but you only have like a little tiny shot of filter coffee left over as kind of excess, that's a treat for you. I'm going to use this kind of nice Kenyan coffee again. You don't need to use a Kenyan coffee for this. You could use anything, I think, that has a little bit of kind of red fruit to it. I think of really nice Colombian coffees can do that. Great Guatemalan coffees can do that. Lots of East African coffees can do interesting fruitiness. That's the kind of ballpark flavor I would recommend for this particular recipe, but we'll talk about adaptation to different coffees in a little bit. Recipe-wise, we're going to brew at 70 grams a litre, that little bit stronger. I want enough coffee flavor in the ice cream that I'm enjoying the coffeeness of it, but not so much that I'm getting kind of caffeinated at a time where maybe I don't want a lot of caffeine and I'm not eating my kind of caffeine allowance for the day. So I figured this is a nice ratio. You can extract it properly, it'll taste really good. And paper filters will help reduce bitterness, kind of particles in there, so definitely recommend that as a kind of brew method. Can be any paper filter though, but paper filter for sure. If you're new to the channel and you want to know more about how I'm brewing this particular coffee, there's a guide to the V60, which I'll leave a link to down below. So as I said, 400 grams of liquid. And a little extra for you. Now here we're brewing somewhere around 1.4, 1.5% strength. If you really want to know about that stuff. You could brew stronger, right? You could use cold brew if you really wanted to in this particular recipe. The choice is up to you, but I'm looking for as much complexity as I can get, even though I'm going to lose quite a lot later. But you know, you want to make sure you're extracting the coffee properly and having a balanced brew at the end of it. So for me, 70 grams, but you could go a little higher if you really wanted to. Cheers. Juicy. So now we need a blender. Now, you don't have to have a giant monstrosity of a blender here. You could use a stick blender. You could probably hand whisk this if you really wanted to, but a blender will help make this whole bit a little bit easier. So first in is our gelled syrup. That's gonna have a slightly weird texture. Don't freak out, it's okay. It's good news, I promise. And then throw in, not all of the coffee right now, but a good splash. Now we're gonna add 3 things for taste reasons, as well as a little bit of texture, because ice cream ingredients have a kind of either taste or texture or sometimes both role. First up, I'm going to add some fat to the whole deal. Again, inspired by that Chef Step recipe, I'm going to use a little bit of cocoa butter, just 30 grams, and that's going to increase the kind of richness of it without competing for the flavor too much. It's relatively neutral and I think a complementary flavor. Second ingredient is perhaps a little bit controversial. I want to use a tiny little bit of cocoa powder. Now, in loads of chocolate cake recipes, they always say use like a little bit of espresso powder or a little bit of coffee in there to amplify the chocolatiness. And I wondered, could you go the other way, right? Could a little tiny bit of cocoa powder amplify the kind of chocolatiness of coffee when it does chocolate, if you know what I mean? And it turns out it does. We're going to use 2 grams maximum, like a tiny amount here. I'm using a very nice one. You know, if you used a sort of more aggressive, more commercial powder, I might reduce that a little bit more, but here, 2 grams. I wanted to bring back a little bit of fruitiness, right? And I was trying to think of a kind of way to do that. And I landed on maraschino cherries. I would avoid something in kind of a liqueur. We want to stay sort of alcohol-free. This is just a sort of sugar syrup. I had some of these cherries lying around. This syrup is delicious, but we're only going to use 10 grams. And in the final product, it'll be there in a very subtle way where you might not even notice it if you didn't know it was there. It just reminds you of that kind of fruitiness of coffee, the sweet, good fruitiness that great coffees have. Quick blend. And then we'll throw the rest of the coffee in. Now what we're going to do, regardless of whether you're going to churn it in a sort of cheap domestic ice cream machine or a fancy domestic ice cream machine, or whether you're going to do what I'm going to do, which is freeze it as a solid block and deal with that later, you want to cool this down as much as possible. Don't put hot things in your freezer. Not a good idea. So we're going to make a simple ice bath for this and just chill it down, getting it ready to go into the freezer. So if this is now fully chilled down to like cold, you could churn it in a normal machine and you'll get a great result. Not quite the texture that I'm going to get today, but a delicious result. I'm just going to freeze this in this little tub to a solid block. Lid on. So we're going to pop this in the freezer for 24 hours, or if you're like me and you want a little movie magic, we have a frozen one right here. Lovely. Frozen nice and solid, ready to be made into delicious ice cream. Let's have a little taste. Oh, look at that texture. Do you know, I don't really know how to describe what this is, because this isn't a purist expression of coffee, because it just doesn't work as a straight kind of coffee ice cream. but it has a lot of what I like about coffee, and a few of those things kind of amplified a little bit. The texture is fantastic. That little bit of extra kind of richness from the cocoa butter is there. You can taste it a little bit, but it's just subtle enough. If you're looking for it, you'll find it, and that's true of the cocoa powder. Again, subtle. If you look for it, you'll find it, but otherwise it's just adding to this kind of overall kind of blend of flavors that is very enjoyable. It's still very coffee, but it's also something more. It's just delicious. Now, the whole point of this recipe, in some ways, was to kind of create a platform on which you could play with. Firstly, don't obsess over carrageenan, Lambda carrageenan in particular. Locust bean gum is doing most of the work here, and you could use other thickeners if you want to. There's plenty of research on using thickness in ice cream online, so sub out as you will for what you can find easily. Secondly, with the cherry flavor in this, it's very subtle but very nice, but it complements the coffee. But if you wanted to brew, say, a really wild fermentation or a very kind of natural processed coffee, you could use pineapple syrup if you wanted to, or anything else, just to add that little bit of complexity back that's missing from the very cold temperatures. And as I said, you could churn this in any ice cream machine that you have. You may not get the flawless texture that this has, but it will still be a delicious treat. And if you're absolutely desperate for dairy, make a reverse affogato. Big scoop of this, steam maybe 100 mils of milk, combine, it's a nice time. The flavor is super interesting. It has become this kind of generic coffee flavor, but this very nice version of it, because it's got all the goodness for specialty in that it's sweet, it doesn't have any bitterness or harshness there, it's got kind of no negative flavors, it's just a very pure kind of classic coffee flavor in the middle. So let me know if you make this, let me know if you iterate on it, leave me a comment down below, but for now I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.